Welcome to How the World Works, a podcast where we talk about work and its role in our lives and our society. I'm Kevin Williamson with the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and I have with me here today our old friend Steve DelBianco. Steve is the president and CEO of NetChoice, which is a trade association that works on technology issues related to the big tech and small tech, various kinds of companies, and free expression and consumer choice and all sorts of things like that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
I run NetChoice, and I started it in 1999, just at the advent of the internet changing the way that we live our lives, communicate with each other, and run our businesses. And what an evolution that's been, right? NetChoice is, as a trade association, we're trying to make the internet safe for free enterprise and free expression. And we fight that battle in three major venues. In Washington, D.C., which includes Capitol Administration, we go to all 50 states. My parachute tour of 50 states occurs every year they're in session. And then also in the courts, increasingly in the courts. We have 24 lawsuits that are active in the U.S. court system right now, all of which contribute to our mission of trying to fend off regulation that messes up the ability of our companies, membership companies, they're all listed on our website, messes their ability to innovate, compete, and deliver value for businesses and consumers alike.
Yeah. You're a little bit older than I am, I think, well, not very much. And you had an early career that was very much, I think, of the 1990s. You did the thing everyone did in the 90s, which you started a business, was pretty successful, you sold it, made some money, and then you could go do what you wanted to.
You got another decade in front of that, though, when you think about it. I'm 66.
Okay.
So I started college in 1977.
Okay. Tell us about the early part of your career, though, starting your first company and selling it.
Yeah, I came out of graduate school, then MBA, had done engineering and business. And at that point, in 1982, computers, personal computers, had just come out. The IBM PC wasn't even on the screen yet, so we were using Apple II. And what I discovered very quickly is that the use of a PC could revolutionize the ability to be productive, especially compared to using timeshare on mainframes or begging a programmer to spend a year and a half developing an app that you could write yourself. So I had programming skills and business technology skills, and I learned quickly that a 22-year-old could actually get paid by others to help them navigate what you could do with personal computers at that time. I don't know that I could have been paid to give advice to anybody else in any other field, but it wasn't unnatural for a 22-year-old engineer, a newly minted MBA, to help businesses out with the use of Apple II and IBM PC to do spreadsheet modeling, computer-based modeling, database construction, and I coded applications as well.
Yeah. Do you still feel like you're on top of technology?
I do.
Do you?
I really make a point of it.
See, I've often said that I've gone through a kind of career evolution that I think a lot of people do. That when I was 22, I was the tech guy for a particular thing, like for desktop publishing. I knew how to do that stuff, and that was what was my paycheck for a long time, was helping newspapers to make that transition to doing their work that way. And then in my kind of late 30s, I fell behind. I stopped keeping up with technology because I was just writing full time, and all I needed to do is be able to send an email and do a Google search and a few things like that. But you've stayed au courant, you think?
I think we have to. I mean, part of my job at NetChoice is to see around the corner, to see where is our next set of threats and opportunities. So in late 22, early 23, generative AI looked like it was going to be transformative for our society, for technology, for our businesses and lives. And being able to jump into that meant learning very quickly how to use it, where the problems were, where the opportunities lied.
Gotcha. What was your first computer?
Yeah, that would have been an Apple II.
An Apple II was your first, so it wasn't a TI-99 or a Commodore 64?
No, sir. I worked so hard and was so busy in high school. I worked at a gas station so I could take care of my 1969 Firebird convertible, and I loved science, technology, and mechanics. And I was really interested in studying engineering. But my father was an ad agency exec. He ran his own business. So typical that an entrepreneur is someone whose parents were entrepreneurs. And watching him work as he would explain really complicated electrical systems, because Westinghouse was one of his clients, right, in Pittsburgh, PA. He would explain these complex systems to the audience of business buyers in ways that addressed their needs. He had this formula of who was the audience and what is the purpose, and that should drive the way one does the communication. So it was very formulaic. And he applied it not just on B2B advertising and marketing, he applied it in his other life, his political life. My father was a Republican leader and an elected local official, and quickly pulled me and my brothers and sisters into the practice of, door-to-door canvassing, licking envelopes and stamps, and being part of the political process. Yeah. And in both cases, explaining to audiences with rhetoric designed to accomplish the purpose with the audience in mind became my guiding principle. And I translated that to say, I'm not probably going to be an engineer. I'm probably going to go to the business world. And that is what gravitated me to get into the consulting field.
What happened to the 69 Firebird?
Oh, gosh, I moved down here 40-some years ago and kept it for a few years. But it was a death trap. It really was, a death trap on wheels. So the time came for me to sell that and move into a somewhat newer car.
It's a beautiful car, though. What were your first years out of college like?
I initially moved here to Washington, D.C. to work with a small consulting firm who built the software I was using while I was in graduate school. I was there about a year and then left to start my own business, and initially using a lot of that very same technology for clients in the financial industry, which is why I called it Financial Dynamics. Built systems for Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, built systems for American Express. And the key then was to discover what they thought was the critical problem they were trying to solve, and then apply that technology in a way that really excited them, right? I didn't want to make it a boring process where I go away for 6 months to code something. I'd show up in 6 days with prototypes. There's a rule I learned quickly is that when your client is thinking of something, they don't really know what they want until they see what they can get. And that meant showing multiple prototypes and rapidly evolving and changing based on the feedback they were giving me. And that became my stock in trade.
Can you give me an example of that?
Building an application for American Express service establishments, these are the restaurants and retailers that take the card, and giving them an app that in the middle of a busy day could allow them to see what they're submitting, what had come back from Amex as a chargeback, learning how to measure their volume, increase their marketing. So building an app like that with very vague sort of goals. But I knew who the audience was. The audience was the small business who accepts American Express cards along with every other card. So finding a way to differentiate Amex from the other cards, finding a way to provide value to that merchant in ways that they hadn't thought of, like marketing, like reducing their chargebacks and losses for returns.
Yeah. Do you still have an Amex?
You bet.
Yeah. So.
Member since 1981.
81. That's a good long number. Mine's not quite that old. Did you enjoy that process of building a business?
Oh, very much. Like I said, my father was an entrepreneur, and what really drew me in was the notion of having control. It didn't take me long to understand that was an illusion. I didn't really control my life. My life was controlled by my clients and my employees. But at least I made the decisions about how I was going to react to the problems that were solved. And I found that a CEO, entrepreneur, founder is mostly in the problem-solving business. I mean, if you're lucky, you show up at work and there's nothing on your desk. And if you're really lucky, problems and opportunities start showing up in the day. And your ability to field, push those off, respond right away, maybe do an initiative to address what you're hearing as incoming opportunities. So it's very reactive. You're problem solving, right? And if you meet a CEO who doesn't have any problems, their life is boring.
Yeah. Although CEOs of big institutions are very different, I find, from entrepreneurs. Those jobs attract different kinds of people. They have different sort of outlooks in the world. There's a reason their sort of median political views are different from one another, I think. Speak to that.
Yeah, I've always said that the person who signs the front of the paycheck deserves a lot more respect than the rest of us who sign only the back of the paycheck, since the front of the paycheck is the guy who's making payroll, who's going without pay in order to make payroll and keeps his team together and moving, taking the risks to make sure that while I'm going to hire 4 people to chase a new account, I've got to find a way to make sure these folks are paid. And somebody who has signed the front of a paycheck is in a far better position to understand the way we weigh risks and opportunities and make investments and then work incredibly hard to have it come to fruition. And a rule my father always told me was, the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Yeah.
It's so true.
I have this theory that about 90% of American domestic politics is about working out differences in temperament regarding risk aversion among different people, individuals, and populations in the public sector and in private life. So I remember when we were having the Obamacare debate way back when, and I would talk to people who would really, there were smart people who understood that having a bigger government footprint in healthcare would mean probably less innovation and some other downsides. And they would get that and say, I'm willing to accept that in exchange for less risk in the system, for less uncertainty about what my bill is going to be, or about whether my insurance is going to cover a procedure, or about whether I'll have insurance next year. And we tend to treat those things as though they were irrational. People who have a high tolerance for risk tend to treat people with high risk aversion as being irrational, and vice versa. But they're not. They're just different sorts of calculations, I think, based on differences in background and experience, and also I think in one's own particular endowments and talents and things. Some people have a mentality and a set of work habits that make them better suited to work in an organization. Some people are more suited to be founders and entrepreneurs. I think a lot of that's, for lack of a better word, what we call character. It's just sort of who you are. And I don't have any really strong reason to think we should prefer one to the other. I think that both kinds of ways of being in the world are necessary, and certainly in a business. One of the things I know that people who work in technology have a problem with sometimes is that you've got 100 people on your staff and 97 of them have started a business while they're working for you, and the other 3 are about to. And there's a good deal of internal competition there. It seems like an interesting it must be an interesting sector to work in, though, because there is so much entrepreneurship and a sense in technology companies that you might be involved in an employee spinning off a business of his own in a way that's positive and constructive. Whereas if you're a car dealer in Fort Worth, Texas, and one of your guys sets up a dealership next to you, you're not going to be happy about that. It's not a mutually beneficial, development. Is it an interesting market that way?
Oh, I think you really nailed it. When I sold my first company, Financial Dynamics, in 1997, we had 150 people, and each one of them was constantly thinking about the way to better themselves through jumping to another consulting firm, going out on their own to be a hired gun as consultant, right? Mm-hmm. Or starting their own business. So that happened frequently, and that mindset is not something you wanted to avoid on purpose. I mean, I hired many people that didn't have that ambition, but once I trained them and they saw the economic opportunities, they would lean that way. And then as one person might leave and get a better job, the buzz around the office was instantaneous.
Yeah.
And, why can't I get that? So I had to be proactive about continuing to move people up on their pay, promotion responsibilities. So it was really a proactive way to do that. You can't wait for the annual review to discover that a lot of folks are dissatisfied with their compensation compared to someplace else. And then we had to create an environment where they valued being on a team, as opposed to putting people off in a corner where they could work as easily from home or as easily from the client, as opposed to being at my team. And I think that has infected everything that I've done in the years since I sold the IT business and started the trade association. The value of collaboration and teamwork is something that you have to cultivate and then help people to realize what they're getting out of it. But it also requires nudging people. Because you spoke of risk aversion. One of the risk aversions that folks have would be whether or not they want to offer to help a colleague who's struggling with a really tough problem that I might be able to help with. Because am I intruding on your turf? And I want to encourage that kind of open door. The other is admitting you need help. Think about that. So many times the expectations that I'll set for things that I need to get done, someone will struggle, not knowing if they're on the right track, realizing they're running out of deadline time, and not tell everybody that they need help soon enough. So the rule is that if you're halfway through the time and you're not halfway done with the job, call time out. Explain, because we may find out that I didn't give you the instructions well enough, right? Maybe I sent you down the wrong track. I may discover that you need more help from someone else on the team that's got expertise in that area. So take a risk and volunteer to help, and take a risk and tell people when you need help. I think that's essential. Kevin, you spoke of risk aversion with respect to the healthcare system, and I concur. And yet risk aversion isn't something that is binary with respect to an individual. Someone may be very risk averse about not being able to cover the cost of their health care, them or their family. Oh, but they might be more of a risk appetite when it comes to quitting one job and going to another, a risk appetite to start a business, to make an investment. And so the risks that I associate with my own family's health, I might actually treat that a little bit more risk-averse way than I do with others.
Yeah, that's why I've always been sort of disappointed about the lack of intelligent reform in the health insurance market because, I mean, insurance is just putting a price on risk. And so once you can figure out how to make that work, you can sort of liberate people to take other kinds of risks in life because they don't have to worry about, well, do I have to stay at this job because, I've got a kid who's got a chronic illness and I'm worried about my insurance in my next place. That's the downsides of failing to fix the U.S. healthcare system in an intelligent way aren't even close to being limited to healthcare. There are lots of other economic costs associated with that, I think, and we fail to make the best use of the human capital that we have because people are locked up by those particular sets of problems. You mentioned selling the business in 1997. I left college in 1996. I didn't graduate, but that was my last year in school. And I've often said that I think that those years, sort of 95, 96, 97, might have been the best time in American history to be getting out of college.
Absolutely.
Because if you went and took a job somewhere, you were kind of like a loser a little bit. Like you're supposed to go out and start a business, right? That's what everyone was doing back then. I had a friend who went to work for a company that's got to be one of the 25 biggest companies in the world. And you remember the 90s pretty well, I'm sure. And basically, they were at that stage in their corporate development. They just needed one guy to be in charge of everything that had .com on the end of it. And that was him. And that was his job. But his peers were kind of like, well, why aren't you out and starting a company instead of running the website for this, giant industrial conglomerate that's paying you gazillions of dollars a year to do this. But it was an interesting time in the sense that there was a great deal of shared optimism about economic matters, I think particularly. There was a sense of, a false sense as it turned out, of a kind of durable political consensus in the post-Cold War years that our fights were going to be about whether the top tax rate was 34% or 38%, essentially. But, the era of big government's over, and Bill Clinton was complaining that he was the third Eisenhower administration, but everyone kind of liked it because, there was a notional surplus and things seemed to be running pretty well. And, of course, that all fell apart pretty quickly after. I really date it from 9/11 when that sort of, paranoia enters our politics and things kind of got worse from there, and the financial crisis certainly made things worse. But of course,
right about the time of the late 90s, we did have the .com bubble burst.
Yeah, that's true. But everyone sort of got through that.
Sure did.
And because everyone saw it coming. I remember, I'll go off on a little tangent here, I'm afraid, but I was working at the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, and it was owned by Morris Communications at the time. There was a good company to work for, and they had a really generous retirement matching program. And the service at the time, because it had started before there was such a thing as a website, there was an automated number you could call and get the value of your investment portfolio, like at the end of the day, like at 3 o'clock. And we'd go into our editorial meeting in the afternoon. Oh, the market's up 400 points today. And everyone would run to the phones like in those old newspaper movies, but not to call in the story, to check their accounts. And I remember thinking, this is going to end badly. This is going to be there's going to be a big correction at some point, and some people are going to be really upset. And you could kind of see the housing bubble coming already at that point too, I think. But we kind of got through that in a way that I don't think we really recovered from the financial crisis, at least in terms of our confidence in the economy. But that 1990s economic transformation driven by the internet wasn't really the first one of that kind. And you've really seen, I think, 2, maybe 2.5, and getting close to 3 of those in the course of your life. First was the personal computer coming onto the scene, as you mentioned, which made people just enormously more productive on the individual level than they had been. And also, people forget, I think, cost a lot of people their jobs. There were a lot of secretarial and administrative jobs and things like that went away from that, because you didn't need 10 people in the back office to be filing paperwork and copying memos and doing things like that. When
they might have lost that job, Kevin,
right?
But they found another job.
Right.
Remember that every single month, the U.S. economy destroys 5 million jobs, and we create 5.1 million jobs every month on average, and that's consistent over decades. So in the course of a a year and a half, we do destroy and recreate 100 million jobs.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the way we do our creative destruction and churn, and people move from old careers, old jobs, to new careers and new jobs, things that are much more suited to what they do uniquely best, as opposed to something that's entirely clerical and can be automated.
Yeah. And that's the example I like people to take away from that, is that there wasn't some economic catastrophe and these people became unemployed for the rest of their lives. And it didn't happen with the internet in the 90s either. It did cost a lot of people their jobs, but they did move on to new things. And it was an era most people remember as a time of great prosperity and confidence and happiness. And now we're on the verge or in the midst, depending on who you ask, of a similar thing in AI. And it's interesting if you go back and look just sort of anecdotally at some of these things. I remember I use the example of my father sometimes, who worked for Procter & Gamble. And they called these guys salesmen, but they didn't really sell anything. His job was to basically drive around to every grocery store, convenience store, gas station in Texas, Oklahoma, and eastern New Mexico, and have coffee with the shop manager and tell him how many cases of Tide he needed that month. And that was how inventory management worked back then. And then along came a company called Walmart and said, "We are not doing this. You're gonna adopt this automated inventory system." And once they had done it, and then of course the adoption cost for everyone else went to essentially nothing. And you don't have guys driving around having coffee with grocery store managers anymore. It's just not a job that exists anymore.
And yet, the single profession that employs more American men than any other is driving around.
Yeah, that's
whether
true,
I'm
yeah.
driving stuff or driving people around. And self-driving vehicles are a tremendous innovation. They are safer than vehicles driven by a person. Mm-hmm. And yet some men who drive today may have to find a different profession.
Yeah. I hate the fact that they are safer because I suspect that the distance between you are allowed to do this and you have to do this is going to be a very short period of time. And I really like driving. I really do. I like driving. I don't have a 69 Firebird, but I did have a 66 Volvo that was pretty fun once upon a time. So anyway, we've gone through these massive changes that really changed the nature of work in a lot of ways, where there are a lot of jobs now that if you had that job in the 1950s or 1960s, you had a secretary or two. And now the sort of mid-level management jobs, you are your own secretary because the PC made that sort of information management and the sort of, wrote day-to-day calendar scheduling, messaging kind of stuff. It automated it or enabled it to be run in a relatively frictionless way to such an extent that it makes sense to keep those people on payrolls. The internet certainly changed almost every business, I think.
Absolutely.
In some ways. Some was it changed in profound ways, like, my background's in publishing and newspapers, and we still call these things newspapers, although there's not a lot of paper involved anymore, although some of them still print a few.
I'm still subscribing.
I subscribe to newspapers, but I don't get paper newspapers. Like, they print the New York Times. I'm sure. I don't think you can get it where I live, but I don't think. When's the last time I picked up a paper New York Times? It's been a while, and I hate that because I love print, and I'm a dinosaur that way, and I love to sit down like at a coffee shop with the New York Post and go through it, or the Washington Post, or the Wall Street Journal, or whatever. And but again, those things threw off economic changes that left people, on average, a lot better off than they had been before. People who weren't there needed explained to them sometimes that think about the 1970s, the 1980s, people were poor. Compared to how we live now, people were poor. Rich people were poor. Middle class people were poor. It was just a whole different kind of standard of living.
Somebody's going to talk to you about this $1,000 iPhone they're using, wondering how it is we got by without it. But we had it. It was roughly $6,000 worth of an plain old telephone system, a voice recorder that you might use to take messages, maybe a separate camera, and then a giant video camera, maybe a weather machine that would tell you what the weather forecast was. All of these are now bundled.
Set of encyclopedias.
Set of encyclopedias.
The Motorola.
How about a news feed, a ticker tape news feed?
The Motorola brick, that Gordon Gekko carries in the movie Wall Street. I used to, every year, I'd calculate what it cost in modern dollars. And the last time I looked, it's been a few years, it was like $11,000 in modern. And it cost about $1,000 a month to operate it for a subscription. And it had a total call time.
And all it did
was like 22 minutes or something.
And all it did was handle conversations, Kevin.
Right.
Now the phone does so much more for us.
Yeah.
And I'm of the generation that thinks about I would use my laptop first, my computer first. But my children and the latest generation are phone first.
Yeah.
phone first. They can't imagine booking an airline flight on a computer and a laptop, everything they're doing through apps on the phone. It changes the way you have to structure the way you display information so that you can be appealing and deliver the information they need on a tiny little format.
Yeah. And in spite of all these changes, delivering great increases in prosperity and how we live and opportunities, and not just economic opportunities, but real life opportunities for people where people can travel in a way that used to be reserved for millionaires. People have access to information, entertainment, and things like that they just did not have at almost any price before. The richest man in the world in 1957 did not have a car that was as good as a 2025 Toyota Corolla. He just didn't. I mean, maybe it had zebra skin seats or something in it, and a team of servants
and no
follow you
seat
around.
belts.
And no seat belts. We didn't have a car that was as good. And yet we continue every generation to worry that we're all going to lose our jobs and no one's going to have any income because the new technology thing is going to take all our jobs and make us all redundant. And we're having that conversation very much right now with AI.
And it might have a function. I'd like to map that onto your risk aversion spectrum that you discussed earlier, in that the risk of perceived unknowns are felt more acutely by someone who's not as confident, doesn't have the self-esteem, doesn't have a track record they can think about where in years past they confronted dramatic change of technology and thrived. They mastered and thrived with earlier technology changes, which can make one a little bit more confident that they too will find a way out of this that's positive, right? Because we did talk about the fact that 5 million American jobs are extinguished every single month. And those people have a disrupted life, but they move to the 5.1 million jobs that are created every month. Anyone who wants a job in America can have one today. Our problem is low labor force participation for a variety of reasons, some of which I think you do some great writing on.
What do you think they are, the reasons, by the way?
For low labor force participation, there are alternatives through my Social Security disability payments. There are alternatives through other aid systems from a society that is attempting to help people get by. And those make it such that, wow, if I decide to take a real job, a 40-hour work job on a construction site, I've got to give up the benefits that allow me to sit on a sofa and play video games while I collect a Social Security disability check. And this is not meant to be pejorative of people that actually got hurt, but it is a significant percentage of the population in small rural American communities. Yeah. I don't know that the answer is to pull them off of Social Security disability payments. The answer might be to make work more and more attractive to them. And the way to do that is not require them to move. I mean, folks that are born and raised in a community with 4 or 5 generations where they went to high school and have friends, they ought to be able to stitch together a living that doesn't require them to move to some large institutional job in a city. And some of that is the peer-to-peer economy enabled by the internet that you've been talking about. The peer-to-peer economy, think about labor in a peer-to-peer economy means driving for Lyft or Uber. You going into Thumbtack or applications like that enable you, a guy who replaces gutters, to instantly replace gutters to people that go into the applications. Another of the peer-to-peer economy would be assets. So you've got a home or a couple of empty rooms in your basement. So you go on Airbnb or VRBO, and that asset then is a way for you to earn income and to improve the quality of that asset. For cars, platforms like Turo allow you to rent your car or one of the cars in your home fleet in a way that allows you as an entrepreneur to earn money without having to leave home. And then finally, with the goods economy, if somebody's really an expert at making a particular hair braid, that she's going to be able to do that in a rural town in Indiana and sell them not only around the country but around the world due to the internet, due to marketplaces that allow us to reach customers we'll never meet in person. So those opportunities should create, not just on the coasts of America, but in the heartland of America, using the peer-to-peer and technologies that we have invented on the coasts, but to allow people to stay and enjoy a quality of life. If we worked a little harder at that and built policies that allowed you to get health care, retirement, and disability benefits as an entrepreneur, we'll have a better path for folks, for young men to get off the sofa and stop playing video games and actually do something that'll generate self-esteem, self-respect, show them that they can deliver results and make a difference in the world and earn the rewards for that.
Yeah. You mentioned the asset transformation. I was thinking of our friend Professor DeSoto and his thing about transforming property into capital, which certainly that has been a very, very useful thing for a lot of people. Although I think Uber and Lyft and the kind of rideshare business is an example of technology producing a service that is probably more affordable and easier to access, but in many ways inferior to what it was before.
Inferior to a taxi cab that you couldn't find, that wouldn't take a credit card.
Inferior in the sense that I lived in New York for a long time, and I got a lot of Uber drivers who couldn't find things like City Hall or the Empire State Building because
even with a GPS on their phone.
Well, they could find it. They didn't know anything about the city, so they had just moved there. They had gotten off the airplane from wherever they immigrated from, and they didn't know where anything was in New York. And because you have the GPS, they didn't actually have to learn the city. And I think there's something to be said for the kind of London taxi driver and the knowledge and that stuff.
That's very quaint.
Yeah, I know.
But it isn't
It's aesthetics. It's not economics, but aesthetics matters too. I do care about this stuff.
Kevin, you talked about the transformative effect of the internet in the mid to late 90s. What we are looking at with generative artificial intelligence, generative AI, is even a larger transformation.
How so?
I want you to think about Energy Secretary Chris Wright, who had said that AI is the next Manhattan Project. And he's speaking of it in terms of economic and defense security vis-a-vis our big rival in China. On the other hand, I could look at AI, generative AI, and say it's the Gutenberg moment for our world. Gutenberg, with the printing press, dramatically changed the way that knowledge was disseminated and accessible to everyone around the world. And AI has done that. I mean, Google search was one thing, and it did change the way you carried an encyclopedia in your pocket. And yet AI, generative AI, is like having an analyst or a lawyer or an accountant in your pocket who can help you to analyze the information in a way that is actually useful to you. And the use of generative AI agents, a chatbot, or if you're in Google search and you turn the AI mode, the AI overview, you should think about how much time that saves you when Google goes out and retrieves the most relevant results to your query, brings those results in, and turns it over to AI to generate a summary that specifically answers you. The time it would take you and I to visit each and every one of those 10 top links, to open the link, find the document, read the document, and then figure out what from there is important. That is now happening in 3 to 5 seconds for free, and it's transforming the way that we are accessing information. It's giving us an appreciation that analysis and summary, comparison, are really the value add over top of just simply retrieving something.
Yeah. There are downsides to Gutenberg too, though. And there's the longstanding joke about what really drives every technological advance is pornography and gambling, essentially. And there's some truth to that. Obviously, it's exaggerated, but the amount of time that passed between the printing of the Gutenberg Bible and the first mass production of things like pornography and political propaganda and anti-Semitic canards that were popular in the Middle Ages and that stuff. It was a very, very short period of time. It's like nanoseconds, essentially.
Yeah. Humans will exploit these new innovations for both good and bad, right?
Yeah. And that's the way I think about AI is it's a tool like any other tool, and tools can be used for good things and bad things. But I worry that, not specifically in the case of AI, but in the case of modern information technology tools in general, that it's not a self-balancing or self-correcting thing. I think it is like, this will sound callous, but essentially, the mass shooter problem, right, is that firearms can be used for good things, firearms can be used for bad things, firearms can be used in an irresponsible kind of way. But if you have a small population of sufficiently nihilistic and or irresponsible or ideology-driven people, they can have an enormous impact, way disproportionate to their numbers, than they could have had in 1850 or in 1920 when we had the Bath School Massacre, which is still the worst school killing in American history. And so AI is, of course, a great tool for the production of propaganda and disinformation and just general fake stuff. And I think increasingly, we live in a world in which, there's a reason that photography's never really been admissible in a court of law as evidence because it's easy to fake photos. And we're taking that phenomenon and now making it it's maybe one of the few times when the word exponentially actually works in the sentence, I guess. That much worse, that much more.
It's a multiplier for sure.
Yeah.
It pours gasoline on the fire that is people with bad intentions who use tools to execute that. The deceptive nature of not just photographs but doctored up videos predates AI, generative AI, but generative AI, as you say, accelerates dramatically.
I wish I could remember what the event was, but a friend of mine was noticing the other day that there's some news video of some dramatic public thing that had happened. I don't remember what it was. But when he saw it, he just immediately assumed it was fake because it was like so dramatic and crazy looking that it was like,
right.
It's
So
obviously not a true thing.
we've turned into skeptics
who
assume we assume that it's fake unless we can become convinced that it's real, and we sometimes look at the progeny of where it came from. We look at it with our own eyes, and our judgment is increasing, our ability to discern what is fake to real.
Is it?
But we are getting better at it. We absolutely are, by starting with the presumption that this has probably been selectively edited or even doctored or altered in a way that the person who originated it had in mind to deceive and steer people another way. And then all of the individuals who shared it on social media or other forms of messaging may not have had the same intention in mind. They may not even know that it was satire or false. But it contributes to a broader trend we have with populism in this notion of distrust of institutions. This is coincidental with the advent of AI, but either the far left and the far right, which I'll say are our populist anchors to our political spectrum, are distrustful of large institutions. They start by distrusting the government, certainly on the right. On the left, but now the right, they distrust big business, big institutions. They distrust big media. They distrust big university systems. So the lack of institutional trust, they don't trust the military, means that skepticism is rising to where the source of the information and the nature of how the media is conveyed, a video, is making everyone very suspicious. That contributes to maybe some healthy skepticism about fakes, but it's an unhealthy skepticism too, because even good things can be tarred by disinformation and misinformation. Good things like AI or the data centers that we need to hold all of the photos and videos that you take and never delete, all the documents and messages that I write and never delete, right?
Yeah.
All of the applications that every business and institution is putting in the cloud means that my industry has got to build a new billion-dollar data center about once every week, 50 of them a year. And you can't ask, why do we need so many data centers, Kevin? It's why do you need so many data centers? It's funny, we talk to groups of folks, and I'll have them pull up their phone and scroll through the apps, and every app on there, from banking to messaging to video to streaming, is all using the cloud. And I'll ask them, where do you think the cloud is, right? It's in a big white building the size of an aircraft carrier, costs about $1 billion, and it's scattered all over the country, serving you wherever you are in the country. Yep. So that has been an opportunity to get people educated on that. And at the same time, we bring in AI, which lives in a data center on servers that have GPU chips bolted to the side and use even more data. So AI is supercharged our need to build more infrastructure, IT infrastructure, data centers in this country. And we're running into a situation where the far left and the far right start from the premise of distrusting everything about a data center. They might be sharing your data in a bad way. The left freaks out over the idea that a data center runs on electricity, and if we generate more electricity, the planet's going to catch fire because of global warming. On the far right, there's a suspicion that it's going to change my bucolic way of life here in rural Indiana. I think you've written about it, the way that populism drives things through victimhood. Mm-hmm. They're coming after me. Nostalgia for a world that may not have ever been at all. And then the notion of performative belligerence, which is a great expression that you came up with. And that I see from politicians, But I also see it to the activists that showed up at a planning commission meeting in rural Wisconsin last week with color-coded T-shirts and signs objecting to the location of a data center on 200 acres in rural Wisconsin. A data center that would bring billions of new investment over 3 to 4 years. And when it was done, 200 jobs paying 6 figures to local high school and trade school grads who then don't have to leave to go to college or move to find a job. And third, we end up paying the property taxes. Most of the property taxes in that rural community are paid by the billion-dollar data center.
Yeah.
And
Once we start building nuclear power plants to power these things, they can stop worrying about the environmental impact anyway, at least the global warming impact.
even the Sierra Club has agreed that nuclear power is acceptable as clean.
Yeah, I think we finally won that debate.
Yeah, but Kevin, nuclear power is a whole nother thing. In 1978, I was studying nuclear engineering at the University of Pennsylvania. Spring of 78, something happened called 3 Mile Island, just a few miles away in Harrisburg. And I'll never forget my thermodynamics professor taking the 12 of us in the nuclear engineering and saying, sorry, guys, but you will never build a nuclear plant in your lifetime.
Yeah.
And advised us to get out. I went into computers, thank goodness for me, but it has taken that long for us to rediscover that nuclear power is safe and clean, and we know how to do it. We need to do more of it.
Yeah. You know, I don't know if this is actually true, but you often hear it said that Frederick Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century. And there are a lot of pictures of Frederick Douglass out there. I'm a huge Frederick Douglass fan, as you probably know. But I figure I'd probably take more pictures of my kids on Christmas morning than Douglass took in the whole of the 19th century in his entire life.
And I'd say the photos are of extremely high quality. And whether you took them with a SLR camera or your phone, the quality improves, which means the amount of storage it takes for that photo grows. I wouldn't say exponentially, but it grows significantly. And then you take videos, high quality videos, and never delete them. It's funny, every July in America, about roughly July 4th and 5th, our servers are hammered with the uploads of people taking video of fireworks. And yet, over time, those videos hardly ever get watched again, right?
Course, yeah.
But it just shows that the moment leads one to want to capture things. And because it's free to store, or we perceive it as free, we store everything and don't bother to delete the old stuff. And then we share through messages or social media or email. We'll share copies of said videos and photos. Well, those don't point to the original. Those make copies and distribute those copies. And they all have to live on data centers that host the cloud.
Yeah. I'm not much of a sentimentalist in most things, but I love fireworks. Your first job, you worked at a gas station, you said, when you were a youngster? What other kind of jobs did you have when you were
Yeah, the first real job was
kid?
working for my father's ad agency as a gopher delivering the material. So he would do drawings and mock-ups of ads, and, well, I put it under my arm and carried it to U.S. Steel or to Westinghouse.
Yeah.
Went up the elevators and showed it to the client. So in the early 1970s, I mean, that's how we would distribute. Today we text you or send you a PDF and let you respond. That world has changed dramatically. But I treasure the time I spent with side by side with my dad, the entrepreneur, who taught me so much about how to be creative in explaining audience purpose design, taught me about the harder you work, the luckier you get, and that being an entrepreneur was the true way to realize that you could make decisions, make differences in people's lives. So I think that was my first job and most important job. I followed that up with some time. During college, I worked at the biggest steel mill in western Pennsylvania. It was the Clairton Works. Clairton Coke Works. It was featured in The Deer Hunter, if you recall. And so I was a engineering student on the summer program for 3 summers in a row. We made ridiculous amount of money. It helped me pay half my tuition at UPenn. But it also taught me some lessons too. I respected the fact that the unions had forced safety rules through OSHA and against U.S. Steel that were important in a really dangerous place. The Clairton Works is a dangerous place. There's so many things that can poison or burn you if you're not step wrong. On the other hand, I was a laborer, and my job was to move things around, clean things up. And yet, I wasn't allowed to touch these bricks, and I couldn't touch those pipes because the union work rules were such that only somebody who was a pipe fitter could move a pipe, even though a handful of us laborers were sitting right there and could help to do it. So I saw how hidebound the division of work can be under a strict union shop, and I kind of lost my interest in working for a giant corporation.
Did you?
Really, and it confirmed that I wanted to follow my father into starting my own business.
And so as an adult after college, did you ever work for anybody else, or you were an entrepreneur the whole time pretty much?
For about a year and a half, I did work for a small software consulting firm.
You mentioned that, yeah.
And which gave me a sense to get better at what I needed to do, and
that was immediately
also
after
taught
college.
me. That's right.
Okay. And then just decided at that point you'd had enough of having a boss.
There was an opportunity that was there because I realized that I was delivering the value to these clients, and what they wanted was my time. And they'd asked me to do things that were maybe a little bit outside of what my employer was doing. But I realized very quickly that I could build a business as a 22-year-old doing consulting in a field because no one else knew any more than I did at the time.
What was the hardest job you had, even like as a youngster, summer jobs, things like that, or later in life that you found just difficult or not to your liking or out of step with your character?
Yeah, since I didn't have very many jobs, right? I haven't worked for anyone else for more than a couple of years of my life,
the work you've done as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I would say that running my own business and now running NetChoice, the hardest decisions you make are when to say no. When an opportunity comes up and you jump at the chance to expand things or you get into a different field, you just have to have the discipline to say no and explain to everyone else why. We're going to stick to our knitting. We're going to stick to what we do best. And then recently at NetChoice, we had to make a very difficult decision with a member that had run afoul of some U.S. laws, and we had to drop the member. Mm-hmm. That was incredibly difficult to do because we prided ourselves at NetChoice on defending the interests of all of our members, regardless of whether they were in the public eye, right? So I'm still working on trying to make that good, right? But that was the toughest decision I've made since I've been running NetChoice.
Yeah. I've always found that firing people is hard. Maybe I just don't have the constitution for it, but I've never enjoyed that aspect of running organizations when I used to do that. I have a backwards career from a lot of people where I started off in management and then spent like 15 years working my way out of it, so I didn't have to have any employees or anyone who answered to me. And I like to have just one person I have to answer to. That's kind of my ideal situation. Like I know who my boss is, and I don't have anyone I have to talk to, and I don't have to go to any meetings. That's the main thing, is to try to avoid the number of meetings one goes to in life.
Right, but running a consulting firm or a trade association means you have multiple bosses.
Yeah,
right,
and lots of meetings. It's just different, different
right.
mode of life. That's why I just couldn't do it. I was actually writing about this the other day in terms of I was writing about the challenges in developing just real long-term policy making. If you want to really improve U.S. trade policy, it's a really tedious process, and you got to have like a lot of meetings, and you're producing planning documents, and they're getting revised, and this is the 10th iteration of it. And I don't think I have very much in common with Donald Trump, but like I get why his personality type doesn't want to do that stuff. Why he wants to come out and just say like, I've got a baseball bat in my hand, I'm going to hit this thing really hard, then I'm going to go on to the next thing that needs to get hit. Because that's kind of where I am in terms of how I like to spend my work days. But there are different kinds of talents, I think, that are, and both of those things are necessary. And good administration is something you mainly notice by its absence. It's like when the plumbing stops working or the electricity goes out. You never think about your lights when your lights are working, but when the electricity goes out, suddenly it's the end of the world. And businesses and organizations that have, there's always that one person who like knows how everything works. Like back when fax machines were a thing, there was always like one person in the office who knew how to fix the fax machine, and you could never fire that person because the office would just completely shut down after that. And it was never a senior executive. It was never a brand new person. It was like a mid-level person who'd been there for 20 years and like knew where everything was.
But I think now we would cross-train. We would cross-train deliberately and explicitly to ensure that we don't become dependent on one single individual who happens to have a skill that others could learn.
How do you go about identifying those things?
The bottlenecks emerge when a problem can't get solved because so-and-so is on vacation or doing a client engagement. So I think that you said earlier that when problems occur, you quickly discover where the bottlenecks are in an organization's ability to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And it becomes rather obvious then what I need to do to cross-train.
Yeah.
Without diminishing the value of that individual, I need to transform their value from one of doing to one of teaching others to do it and expanding the team.
If you weren't doing what you do now, what do you think you would have done in life? If you'd taken a completely different path in life, did you want to be a baseball player or
I certainly had aspirations
race car
to baseball,
driver?
and I've gotten enough speeding tickets to know that as a race car driver, at least I had one part of that I could do well. But to be
What was
honest,
your position in baseball? What'd you play?
Pitcher.
You're a pitcher. Okay. Were you any good?
Good enough, but really not good enough to play college ball.
Sure.
Yeah, and I did play a lot of adult baseball. Continued to keep the fantasy alive at fantasy camps for the pro teams and played adult baseball.
Oh, that's fun.
It's a blast. It is. It's a great game, and World Series is upon us right now. We have Game 5 tonight between the Dodgers and Blue Jays, and I love watching that.
Well, with apologies to George Will, who I admire very much and read every word he writes. I don't know a thing about baseball, and I don't follow it, and I've never been able to quite get it.
Hey, but lately, NetChoice, by doing a lot of work in the States and in Washington, we discovered very quickly that the performative belligerence, to use your phrase, the performative belligerence of populists would lead them to enact laws that we told them were obviously violations of the First Amendment or unconstitutional. And lawyers would advise them, the politician, that yes, Steve's right, this is going to be challenged in court and you'll lose. And that was very little inhibition to many populists who are looking to be performative at wrecking things. And therefore, we would have to go to court. And we have 24 lawsuits at NetChoice, and nearly all of them have obtained preliminary injunctions. Two of our cases went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and
Those
that went
are
our
age
way.
verification cases? Or?
No, those were content moderation cases.
Content moderation cases.
Yeah, fascinating concept that after January of 2021, when social media platforms kicked off Donald Trump, that was a signal to Governor DeSantis, right, or Governor Abbott in Texas to say that they could be a hero to the MAGA faithful if they made it illegal for social media to limit the content that goes online. So they passed laws, and NetChoice sued, and they went to the U.S. Supreme Court, who affirmed that the government cannot force you at the Dispatch to carry content you don't want to carry, and it cannot force Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to carry content they don't want to carry, right? And that's been a revolution at returning everyone's understanding to what the First Amendment says. It limits government's ability to tell any of us what we can see and say, right? And that has increased my appreciation for the role of litigation, the role of lawyers, right? Too much of what
one hates to admit it.
They do, because what is I believe one of the barriers to success of the American economy and American individuals is our litigation culture, and we are unique in the entire world because we don't follow the English rule of lawsuits. The English rule says the loser pays the cost the winner has incurred. So the rest of the world, a frivolous lawsuit designed to shake down a big company for a payment, they never happen. There isn't any tort reform in the rest of the world. It's only in America that we need tort reform, limiting damages, that we need things like Section 230 of the Communications Act to limit the liability of a platform for things that a user said on the platform. Yeah. Did you ever see The Wolf of Wall Street? True story, Kevin, right? That really happened. That was Stratton Oakmont, who sued Prodigy, a bulletin board service, over the fact that some investors who'd been defrauded by Stratton Oakmont, by Leonardo DiCaprio, were warning other investors against investing with them.
Yeah.
Well, that was a defamation lawsuit, and Leonardo DiCaprio's character's firm prevailed in court. That's what led Congressman Chris Cox to write Section 230, to say that you can't hold the platform liable. You can sue the hell out of the people that wrote the defamatory, but you can't sue the platform that it showed up on.
Yeah.
So lawyers are a barrier to innovation, since lawsuits in the American culture have contributed dramatically to the cost of medical care, the cost of driving a truck to deliver goods. The costs of so much what we do have to be factored into that. A lawsuit can be devastating. Even if you might win down the road, the costs you have to pay to hire competent defense means you're going to spend a lot of your money in a courtroom or with lawyers. And I believe we need to solve that. And currently we're solving it one issue at a time. An example that I'd like to bring up is that Illinois passed a law called the Biometric Information Privacy Act that made it a crime, punishable by $1,000 to $5,000 per incident if someone scanned your biometric information, fingerprint or face, without your express written consent. And lawyers in Chicago who wrote the law very quickly sued. They sued Shutterfly, Meta, which at the time was Facebook, Flickr. These were photo services where you could go into your photo album of photos you took of your kids and say, identify all the photos of my wife. That would do facial recognition on her photos without express written consent. So this law firm obtained billions in damages, and none of those services now are available in the state of Illinois. The same thing's true of the Ring and the Nest doorbell cameras, which can do facial recognition to allow known family members or care providers to get in. That's not available in the state of Illinois, since every time you scan somebody coming up to the door, there could be a $1,000 to $5,000 violation.
Oh, Lord. Yeah, the lawsuit stuff is funny. I remember I didn't actually get sued for libel, but I had someone who was talking about suing me for libel, and the person was a lawyer and a former county prosecutor where I had a newspaper at the time. And I just remember that there's no way they're ever going to win this suit, and it's never going to get into court. But every time I pick up the phone, it's $1,000. The lawyer wants to talk about this, the lawyer wants to talk about that, and they can really can't beat you down on that. So yeah, it does add to the cost of everything else too. What other stuff are you all litigating right now?
Well, yeah, I described earlier how we sued Florida and Texas when they tried to limit the ability of the platforms to decide what to carry. A lot of other litigation has been over attempts to require age verification or put curfews on the use of material that is protected material. And by that I mean discussions outside of pornography are lawful for all ages. The only thing that's unlawful would be obscenity or pornography for folks that are under 18. And I have no interest at all at preserving the pornography industry. None of my members are involved in any of that. And yet the states have decided that they want to require age verification before a 17-year-old uses Google search to do her homework, or a 14 or 15-year-old wants to use social media because her friends are using it, or messaging services, viewing YouTube for downloaded user-defined videos. So what we had in multiple states was an attempt to impose age verification standards for access to information that the First Amendment protects for Americans of all ages. We've been very successful using the First Amendment to get injunctions to strike down those laws. I do think that over time, our society and our technology companies are moving towards trying to figure out a way of what is appropriate for a certain age group without necessarily asking you and I to provide two forms of government ID before we can use YouTube.
Yeah. I'm going to get some of those YouTube people in here at some point and ask them why their service seems to think I want to watch videos that are AI-generated Bigfoots telling racist jokes. Because YouTube apparently thinks I'm really, really interested in that, and I can't.
I'm not sure they could even answer the question.
Can't figure out why. But
Right.
yeah, this sort of ultimate black box. The authors don't understand it, and no one else does either. So as we get ready to close up, what are the issues related to work and employment and the labor force that cross over into your world that we should be looking out for in the next 6 months to 18 months?
Yeah. One is the how do we address the notion that technological innovation through generative AI is going to change the nature of work, right? So there's a calm down aspect to say that, remember, we get rid of 5 million jobs every month in this economy. And even Bernie Sanders trying to frighten everyone into say that 100 million jobs could be eliminated through AI. That's a year and a half in American economy. All right, we can do this. We'll adjust. I'm trying to suggest that workers need to understand that they're not just workers, but they're consumers. And as consumers, they are on the cusp of tremendous breakthroughs on what AI will do for science, technology, medicine, longevity, and quality of life. That value accrues to all of us as consumers and is likely to generate quality of life opportunities to where we are likely to be at a 3-day work week in 10 years, 1 decade out. I don't know why we came up with 5 days to begin with. I guess it was better than 7, but 3 sounds a lot better than 5. So think about a way to enjoy the benefits of what AI can do to make all of us more productive, as well as providing a higher quality of life, solving fusion, for instance, as an engineering issue, coming up with predictive and preventive measures against the diseases that debilitate so many Americans. So I think that will lead us in the right direction. And another aspect is to reacquire an appreciation for manual work. When I was in high school in the 70s, there was wood shop and metal shop classes. Mm-hmm. Guidance counselors were quick to route people there if they didn't look like they were likely to go to college. And that all went away 10, 15 years ago. There aren't any more shop classes. We need to bring that back so that particularly in rural America, a high school junior or senior can see a route to make a good living without necessarily having to leave town to find a job or to go to college. So I think we're going to see a lot of revolutions in work, but we have to be confident that we can master these new technologies and use them. A lot of that confidence comes from people experiencing it. So a lot of us are experiencing AI when we do a Google search because AI is helping us to get it back. And as people try more and more generative AI, agents that create your schedule, an agent that books your travel, gives you ideas for a party, comes up with recipes, as agentic AI begins to solve more and more problems in your life. I used it last night because my son is considering a legal agreement for a guy who hit his car, right? A release of liability. Well, it took about 15 seconds, right, for AI to generate the legal agreement. So, Kevin, I'm not calling in a lawyer to generate an agreement.
Yeah. I know you're going to tell me I'm wrong about this, but I want to hear why I'm wrong. And that is that I would calculate there's about a 50-50 chance that in 20 years we all look back at this moment and say it seemed like AI was going to be a bigger deal than it turned out to be.
Interesting. And that would be your belief is it's not as bad as some of us feared. Oh, and it's not as good as some had hoped, right?
Yeah, that it just doesn't quite bloom in the way we all seem to be assuming.
Will that be because we suffocated the bloom through regulation of the technology?
Possibly.
It's where we're headed now. We had 1,100 pieces of legislation in the United States last year at the state level that regulated the underlying technology, right? It's like regulating the typewriter instead of what it is you do with it. We have broadly opposed those and convinced states that we already have in this country protections against fraud, abuse, discrimination, consumer protection statutes. They're at the state and federal level, and they protect us from cradle to grave. And those enforcement mechanisms don't actually care whether the person who wouldn't give you that home loan, they discriminated against you for a home loan. We can enforce against that individual regardless of what technology they used. They might have used AI, they might have used Microsoft Excel, or it could be the darkness of their own soul that led them to discriminate, but we already have the ability to address harms. So let's all calm down and not regulate the underlying technology, but rather be attentive to what harms there are, no matter what technology was used. And let's spend more time and money protecting people from the harms that happen.
Yeah. Well, we're here in Washington today, and I'm just surprised to learn that there are enough legislators going to work in the country to produce 1,100 pieces of bad legislation.
It'll be 2,000 next year.
At least someone's doing something. Steve, thanks so much for your time.
Kevin, thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Well, that concludes our most recent episode of How the World Works. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Steve DelBianco as much as I did. He's a pretty fun guy to talk to. If you'd like to watch a video of this conversation, there'll be a link to that on YouTube in the show notes, and we will talk to you next month. Thanks for coming.